Today's video I'm going to talk about a particular job where the walls were awful, and not only that, it looked like the ceiling was about to fall down. So let's go straight into that. Let's go into today's video. As you can see, these are the walls I'm dealing with. Now we're looking at Artex looking walls, and I'll be honest, I've never seen walls like this before. So not only did they have the Artex stipple on top, but they also had a load of lumps. There wasn't any areas that were really that flat. So what I'm going to do on this job is just start again. First idea is I'm going to PVA and really just start with a fresh base 3VA, get everything tacked out, because obviously it's not necessarily got a high suction, but we've got to make sure we've got to be able to plaster on top of it. And this is the stuff we're using. We're using bonding, which is designed for low to medium suction backgrounds, which is basically anything smooth and anything that hasn't got much pull to it. So I've mixed a load of this up. As you can see, we're starting with the chimney breast. And the reason bonding is ideal is because not only can you go on Artex, you can also go on plasterboard. By the way, there is scrim tape between the two areas from the top leading onto the board. Is scrim tape between the two. And I'm applying the bonding now, I'm putting it on thick, and you'll see now why I'm not caring too much, because I've just decided to come all the way down. I'm just going to do this whole room from scratch, and I'm going to start again. I'm not going to mess around with this one. There's so many areas that are uneven, so many areas that are just damaged, that I took this job on knowing what it looked like, and I've just decided to do it all from scratch. So here's what we're doing, applying the bonding, and everything is getting ruled flat. So I've got my feather edge, or straight edge, however you want to see it, and I'm ruling it vertically and then horizontally, and basically everything is getting done properly. I don't want any callbacks on this, and to be honest, it'll be so much easier for my plastering if I just bond it out, get a flat base, and start again. So I've ruled off, and any low spots I've just filled back in with the bonding, and then I'm going to rule off again. It's tricky business using the rule, but I mean, I use it all the time now, and I'm so used to it that I'd much prefer just to bond out the walls and get a nice starting point, rather than messing around with anything else really. So that is dead flat. Now we just stick the beads on whilst the bonding's still nice and wet. Not bad, nice and simple. And then what I'm doing is using the bead as a guide and using the back of the trowel just to level off with the rest of the wall. And don't be scared to use your trowel as a little guide, by the way. Bonding is a great product, but it sticks to everything, and it's a pain in the ass to clean. But it's good. Yeah, bonding is a messy product, but it's so diverse, and this is why we're using it on these types of walls, because it does work for every surface. But believe it or not, like I said, these walls were so out of shape that I just decided to do the whole thing. And believe it or not, it's easier to do a full wall like this than it is to do a chimney breast, because you've got bigger areas to work with, means it's going to be easier in the long run. Okay, so one final trick when you're using bonding, I like to use this every time you use bonding or hard wall, and this is a devil's float. Basically it's just a float with some screws drilled into it, and all you're doing is, with 2 centimeters depth, we're just providing a mechanical key. So what this does is it flattens the bonding whilst giving it a key ready for plastering. Now here's for the messy part. I was doing this ceiling, and I turned up. I wasn't expecting it to be as bad as this. Basically the whole thing's rocking, and basically what's happened is the clout nails have basically failed, and they're not, if you move the ceiling it's just popping all over the place, and it's basically ready to come down if you ask me, which is never a nice thing to deal with. So as you can see, the nails have popped everywhere. This is where it's up to you to decide what to do. I went straight to the customer and just said, right, look, this ceiling needs overboarding or pulling down or starting again. And to be honest, he said, we want to save a bit of money, we don't really want to go down that route. So I suggested, because the covering's been taken back, we can see exactly where the joists are. So what we've done is pinged a line end to end, and that's given us a big clear guide on where the joists are, and all we've done is counter screwed in the joist. So everywhere along that point we've just screwed some 70s, which means we just give it a nice bit of hold. So not only are the old nails in there, but we've also drilled all the way through along every single joist. Now in my opinion, is that enough? We're gonna find out in this video if it was enough, but I personally, in a situation like, much prefer to overboard it. You've got Artex ceiling, which can be a pain in the ass to go over anyway, and you've got a situation where, you know, if you're going on top of that, could it be risked? Let's find out. So what happened, I mixed up some multi-finish. Now the secret here is I mixed the multi-finish with the bonding. What this does, it gives you a bit more thickness, so it allows you to get over the texture on the Artex ceiling. Now I actually mixed this up at 5:20. I started later, so not only was this a nightmare of a job, but I had to do a job in the morning, finish a job off first before I started this. So it proved out to be quite a late evening. Now, it's never really fun, but it is what it is, isn't it? Now, the reason I mix the bonding with the multi-finish is so it gives you a bit more depth and it allows you to get over all the ridges. That to me is very important. So none of the Artex texture will shine through. What you don't want is for the Artex to shine through when you start putting your multi-finish on. So this was the whole ceiling when it was done. This is what it looked like.
Think I'm close enough to the ceiling? Literally got a millimetre to spare.
Next thing, speed skim all the way across. And I actually lose footage of myself doing this here and I'm out of the picture, but the speed skim for these Artex ceilings are an absolute godsend because it really just flattens it off with ease and it makes the whole job a lot easier to work with. So that's the speed skim. And that's what it looks like once it's flattened with the once over. Looking pretty good so far. And now I'll just go straight to the trowel, and obviously I've second coated on top of this now. So we've had the bonding coat mixed with the multi-finish, and now I've just put the second coat on. Now what we're doing is just focusing on flattening in. As you can see, I'm really working on the edges there, and I'm cutting back any excess that's on the opposing walls. You don't want that to just harden up. You want to get rid of that as soon as possible. As you can see, you're getting such a nice smooth finish just by using that multi-bonding, multi-kind of action together. And yeah, all you're doing is working it in the same situation. As long as you've got the right mix and the right thickness that covers all the Artex, the rest should be easy. And that is the end product. Like we say, we're going to discuss in the video whether it was enough to do this. But that is day one done, and so far happy with the results. Let's see how the rest goes. Okay, so that was the first day done. Walls mainly bonded. As you can see, I didn't have enough for the back wall. I needed to save a bit of bonding for the ceiling. And most of the walls were floated out, scratched, and the ceiling was plastered. Now let's get to the good bit. This was about 3 days after. So the first job was PVAing all the bonding. Again, awful job really, but the PVA needs to be bonded out and it needs to have a decent amount of suction controlled. So all we're doing here is just applying the PVA directly to the bonding. I did about 50-50. 50 PVA, 50% water, and that's more than enough. On tip, this is how you know if you've got adequate suction. PVA just sits on top of the bonding. That's when you know that you've got control over the suction and you can plaster it. You can see it's just sitting on top. That's just been applied. But not when it doesn't suck in, it's when you're good to go. I mixed up some multi-finish, which is a plaster you should be using on top of British gypsum bonding. As you can see, nice application of PVA applied, and what I'm doing is just applying the plaster directly to it. And the big thing you need to consider when you are applying onto bonding that's been keyed out is it eats plaster. It will just eat your plaster up. Just because of the grooves and you've got the mechanical key inside the plaster, it just drinks your plaster and eats it up. So just always mix a bit more when you are working on top of solid plastering like bonding or even hard wall, even sand cement. Just always make sure you mix a bit more up. Now I tested the suction, it was well controlled, so I've basically just gone to opt in for plastering most of the room. Like I said, I had to kind of get ahead of myself. I've got lots of work, so hence why I was working late the other night. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting the right amount. So here's a good technique. You can just see from the side on as I'm applying the plaster that I'm trying to get it as flat as possible, just in case that if the bonding does turn, and at least I've got a bit of a backup in knowing that the plaster's semi-flat and, you know, flattish to begin with. So I'm just applying it and always coming back on myself, trialing out the lines, the big lines that I've left behind. Big strokes. Again, I'm trying to work fast because I want to get a lot of the room plastered. So I've got this left side of the wall. I'll plaster that wall to the right, and then I come back round and plaster the full length of the room on this main wall here. It's around, I can't remember how big it is actually. I think it's around 6.5 meters long. So a fairly decent sized wall with fairly sized hit, which is why it's so important to make sure that you get your PVA right at this stage. You don't want to be caught out. And again, just making sure that we're applying the plaster nice and flat. But what I will say is I absolutely love plastering onto solid plaster like bonding or hard wall. I just think you get such a nicer finish, and we'll go into that in a minute. The speed skim again is an absolute game changer, especially on chimney breasts when you've got bead to bead. It just really flattens out the lines and starts giving you a nice guide to work to. So I've used the speed skim there to flatten off. The speed skim all the way through actually. And especially at this point, the bonding and the plaster is pulling in nicely. It's not going off too fast, it's not going off too hard, which is good for me. Because if you've seen in another video, it kind of went wrong because of a similar situation. I'll post a link near this video if you're interested in watching that. But yeah, this applying the second coat, it's all the same. So I'm not going to go too much into this, I don't want to bore you and waste your time. The second coat is slightly thinner and you use a lot less plaster because you haven't got the grooves to fill in anymore. But still, I always put a decent thickness on when I'm applying to solid, just in case it does turn. So that's the second coat applied. Now what I've done is just flattening off. I'm using my water brush, and then as you can see, it's still a lot of life in the plaster. It's not sucked in too much, which is another reason you should be using bonding if you're filling or if you're overlapping over walls that have already been plastered before, because it just gives you a lot more shelf life. Hard wall pulls in a lot faster and you've got to do smaller quantities. What I'm doing here is using the water at this point, brushing in the bottoms and then just flattening, coming back on myself, taking out the lines. As you can see, there's still a lot of life in it. And you'll see on this chimney breast now that I'm really starting to get that finish, and it's starting to get a nice sheen on it. It's not too shiny, but it's starting to get that eggshell finish that you really want in plastering. And that just comes at this point, lots of water. It's starting to pull in now. And what you'll find when you are plastering onto bonding or hardwall, you'll probably do a few less steps in the plastering process, just because it pulls in towards the end a bit faster. So internal corners, keep them nice and clean. I'm not using the corner trowel, I'm just trying to make sure that I get it as flat as possible. To be honest, I tend not to use corner trowels, I just do it by hand nowadays. Unless there's 6 angles on the go, I'll just tend to use the trowel as it is. Now this is a penultimate stage plastering, this is the wet trowel. And all you do is brush it across the wall with your water brush, and then just give it a hard trowel to follow through. And this is what really gives it its finish, and this is why I love working on solid plaster, because it just pushes in, it really compacts well. And I prefer plastering onto hardwall, bonding, sand, cement. I just prefer the finish. I prefer how solid it is after it as well. So if we're looking at that compared to what it was like when we had the spiky Artex of hell, I think the walls have gone pretty well. Again, wet trowel on the chimney breast. Bead to bead is the best way, just to use your water brush, because it just gives it that last bit of moisture it needs, and it really gives it that nice eggshell finish. I did also do a dry trowel after this, but with bonding, again, I don't think you need to do as many steps. And there's the reveals, just finishing them off nicely, working on the inside out, and that is finished product. So that is it. The ceiling's drying nicely, the walls have got a nice eggshell finish, and we've pretty much done most of the room. You can see the ceiling has still got a lot of drying to do because there's a lot of moisture up there. And on the same day I did use skim out the back wall with the bonding which was needed. That's it, that's the job done, job completed. The ceiling was actually right in the end, and the walls came out a lot better than what I thought they would have done. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, but more importantly, if you want to see what happens if you can't get a wall dead flat, watch this video, because this wall will never be flat and there's nothing I could do about it. But if you watch that, then you'll realise that sometimes you can't get every job right. Click that there, and yeah, see you in the next one.